It is a lovely evening, and I do not think I'm going to get rained on. So we'll just wait a couple of minutes. Thank you to those who've joined already, very quickly. To wait for people to join. Probably kick off the discussion at 5 p.m. And I would remind you, if you are coming to Clubs Night after this, to sign up on the event page, because it just makes it a lot easier for the exec to pop people into teams. So we'll just wait a couple minutes. I'll get up my little. Wait to see people and the comments people leave. Lockdown is finished. I'm so excited. Hopefully we'll have an in-person debating event sometime soon. But I hope everyone is happy to know. Oh, this is not actually a noise from the bench. Sorry, I left my name as noise from the bench. I'll change that to Thursday development stream. Yeah, hopefully we'll be having some more in-person Australs events. In terms of general Auckland debating news, we are having our trial for Australs on this coming Sunday. If you desperately want to trial, and this is the first time you're hearing of this, just flick a message to the exec and we'll try and make things work for you. But we're also looking for more judges. So if you're someone who doesn't particularly want to speak, but wants to judge at an awesome online tournament with all of the fun Aucklanders, you're more than welcome to. Even if you're not from Auckland as a campus, so say you're from another New Zealand campus and your university is not sending a squad to Australs, feel free to flick us a message. We'd love to have you along. Of course, numbers dependent, but we think that tournaments always like having more judges. So Auckland is going to be lit, and of course we've got Auckland Whippersnapper also in the works, which is our pre-Australs tournament. So we invite everyone from New Zealand, get involved. We've had huge amounts of signups. Our current signups number already exceed. This will be the largest tournament hosted in New Zealand probably since the last time Australs was here, but has the potential to be even larger than Otago Australs from the way signups are going. So please, if you are interested, we'd love more New Zealand teams. We've mainly had huge international buy-in, but a lot of New Zealand teams still are yet to have their trials for Australs, and we'd highly encourage you to come along because that'll be really fun. So I reckon we can get started on what today is actually going to be about. We're going to be chatting about introductions and setup. So essentially, what should you be doing with the first 2-3 minutes of your speech? How do you make sure it has the most impact? How do you make sure that you have the transition between your points really nice and sharp? Just because, especially going into trials, a lot of what people are looking for is a sense of polish, the ability to deliver ideas cleanly. So we're going to be talking about those first few minutes of your speech and how to put yourself on the front foot for dealing with things. Obviously, I'll, as usual, put it in the lineage of stuff that we've previously discussed. As we've talked about from the very first episode, the two things I like to think about when I go into prep, and in fact, as the debate goes on, one, the comparative. How do you make sure that you're comparing two things within a debate that the debate is actually about, and trying to pull the judge towards your way? And on the other hand, you've got your framework. How should the judge be judging the debate? How should they be thinking about things? And then we've gone through different seminars looking at responsiveness, looking at setting up points, all the different ways that you can make points have particular impact within the debate, and how to make sure that they stick when the judge is making their final decision. So what I'm going to do is I'll break up the introduction into a few sections. So obviously you've got your first 10 seconds. What should you be doing with those 10 seconds? What should you be doing with the following 30 seconds in terms of getting everything in terms of model or split, and it's going to differ a little bit for particular speakers. And then I'll talk about the specific way that you do a setup in terms of the splits that you bring and explaining what the rest of your points are going to be, and then jumping into the rest of those points. And remember, we have had, I think, a really good discussion. Maybe it was our fourth, fifth, or third episode about different types of points and how you bring it. So what we're going to be looking at with our introduction often will mimic the stuff that you are trying to achieve with your speech, the different points that you're bringing, and what exactly you're going to be doing in the minutes after your introduction. So if you have excellent introduction skills, you often find yourself not lost. feel free not to watch this video. Of course, feel free to continue watching this video. I think this video will be very good and useful for you to give you a systematization of the way that you approach introductions. But what we discussed in those earlier episodes about what particularly you need to bring as you bring different types of points is deeply relevant. Hopefully today we do not get any rain. It wasn't scheduled to rain. Grace said that to me as I went outside. So no deep fear, but the sky is particularly gray in Auckland, and it is getting a little bit chilly. So if you're not sending in heaps and heaps of questions, I'm clearly going to freeze to death. So as usual, just flick a message to the comments. If you do have a question, I'll answer it live, or you can flick me a message. You know, I'm on Facebook. You know who I am. I'll be able to answer it as we go through, and hopefully it'll be good for everyone to have a little bit more engagement, so you don't just have to listen to my voice monotonously talk about my perspective on introductions for 45 minutes. Okay, so how should you be approaching introductions depending on which speaker you are? So the first thing to note is, as I said, you have those different parts of your introduction. So you have your first little bit, and then you have the setting up the debate bit. So explaining what, having a particularly impactful introduction, then getting down to the nitty gritty, kind of like the administrative side of debating, making it very clear to the adjudicator what you're going to be doing in your speech and how your speech will fit into the broader adjudication. So if we try and distinguish what is necessary to tease out in these two particular things, the way that I approach it is to remember that the first 10 seconds is preceded by utter silence. It's preceded by the judge just musing on points that they think are relevant from the previous speech. And so you need to drag the judge very quickly back into your world, back into what you want to convince them of. So remembering that it's a particularly impactful moment in the debate is useful in terms of figuring out what you want to do with it. And there's a range of things you can do with it. You can use it to impress on them the importance of a particular thing, or tell them a particular story, or generate particular clarity for the judge over how they should adjudicate a certain clash. So what you'll want to do there is really give yourself momentum, and then when you dive into your split points, you're going to want to give them that overall clarity. So how does this distinction work as you go speaker by speaker through the different debate? Because obviously there are slightly different skills that are relevant for each of the different things. So if you are someone who is bringing a speech and you're the first speech in the entire debate, often it can be very hard to generate that sense of excitement or to generate that sense of clarity going forward for the judge, because you've got nothing to push back. There's nothing to rebut. Often introductions just borrow something that they think is quite helpful from the opposition speech, a mistake that they've made, one particular bit of framing that they've wanted to embrace, and then push back against it and generate some different, to try and change the judge's mind on that particular issue. Of course, you can't do that as the first affirming speaker. So how should you be setting up your introduction? What I think that first speakers in particular should be doing is reserving the first 10 seconds of their speech to telling a particular story that they wanted the judge to understand. So often that story will be about a particular stakeholder. It'll be walking through how a particular mechanism works. It'll be trying to establish something particularly strong in the context. It's about slotting part of the overall case that you think is going to be highly important to how the judge makes their decision, or give color to the way they make the decision, or set the tone for the rest of the debate, and making sure it's front and center into your speech. And the way I particularly like to do it is not just a staid, the most important thing in this debate is the context of X, Y, and Z, or how this mechanism operates, is to really tell a story and make that story sound quite familiar to the judge. Make it sound like a story that the judge has heard 100 times and is only now linking into this particular new problem that you're confronting. So often when you have that moment of introduction, it's about generating a impetus for your case, explaining why it's going to be something that's particularly important, explaining the link that'll be the light bulb in the judge's head, but it's also about bringing in all the other stuff the judge knows, linking it to broader discussions, really grounding the debate in a broader context that is helpful for the judge when they don't particularly know much at this stage, to start making links that are helpful to you. So as a first speaker, you really want to be telling a story. In the administrative side of the introduction, what you particularly want to be doing is giving clarity to the judge about where your case is going, and what you want them to take away from the foundation of your case. So often the way I like to think about it is when you're going through your split, you want it to be incredibly clear exactly what the case is, just from your different point titles. And often feedback I'll give teams is that your point titles need to be specific when you're giving a split. It can't just be like on the issue of X. As a first speaker, you need to tell the judge exactly what they should be concluding from this. My first point is in the context of why we are likely to see X thing happen because X reason. So have that little three-step process, because thing, so context, solving a particular issue or particular mechanism, impact, we are able to solve that problem. So you have basically a mini point within your introduction, and it really helps them ground that thought. They can begin thinking about it straight from your split, makes it very clear what they want to be talking about. In terms of your setup, just need to be explicitly clear within debates. Remember, it's okay to clarify things as things go on. There can be uncertainty within cases. You don't want to be delivering like a 40-point model. And so often what you use is you explain how you resolve the detailed clashes that come up. So often when I set up when I'm speaking first and I'm setting up a particular model, I'll give the core points of that model. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. Maybe we'll fix this one obvious problem that someone said. To avoid this problem, we'll have this particular solution. And then I'll say, and of course, we can't get out every detail. To some degree, this policy would evolve to face particular challenges, and we think that policy evolution can happen quite naturally. So giving the judge a clear indication that you're firm on the issues that are important, but you have a degree of flexibility as to how you're going to approach things going into the future. So first F, tell me a very clear story, have a model that is detailed to the point that is useful, but then leaves room for that flexibility, and then have particular points where it's clear where those points are going, it's clear why they matter to their case, the judge can take away no matter what they want. And remember, we had a long discussion about the role of first speakers being particularly to add a huge amount of context to the debate, to add color, to often do some of the more unglamorous work of building up a particular worldview, and then letting all of the ends being closed by your later speakers. So you're going to want to front load that story that you're telling, that vision of the world from the very first moments of your first speech. And I think that's just as true for a first AF, for a first neg as for a first AF. But note, the story that you can tell as a first neg tends to be much more comparative. And one thing that I like to do is you listen to the story that comes out at the first affirming speaker from their introduction, and then you say, how does that actually work out in the world that I want to try and convince the judges? So say if they've made a beautiful speech about the way that nations respond to particular issues, and you're going to be like, the first speech of the affirming team made it incredibly clear that the way they think nations respond is X. But if you are a nation, bam, you insert a story about the different factors that go into that, and that immediately allows the judge to see that comparative, to see where your worlds diverge, and really what you're doing at first is a contest between worlds, and then just getting out all of your material. So you want a concise, sharp introduction, then getting into all the contextual work for the rest of your speech. A little bit different for later speakers, because at that point, hopefully the story is really strongly established within your debate. And what you're going to be wanting to do is a little bit more debate crafty. It's a little bit more technical as to how you're able to push yourself one team or the other. Often at second, I'll still keep a narrative style approach, but what I'll be trying to do is change the story or shape the story in a much more responsive way to the earlier story. So adopting some of what I talked about from the first neg, and then being very clear as to how I think our story is different, and then changing our story a little bit if I need to fill in particular gaps. So it's basically retelling that particular story that came at first in a way that best engages with the story that comes out at their basically within their case. Note particularly that I think it changes a little bit when you get into your split, because obviously you need to clean up some of the model stuff. I often have a foundation point. If you're interested in what foundation points are, I advise you to go and have a look at the episode that we did on all the different types of points. So it's a point where you can clarify how the model works. You can clarify what your framework is. You can clarify any particularly large contextual issues that you think respond to a lot of the issues that they have brought. So I think that's quite a useful point and could potentially be considered part of a setup or part of an introduction. But after I've told my story, I get straight into my split. And what you want to do with the split as a second speaker isn't just to outline each of the points that you bring and then have it be particularly obvious for the judge that these are all important points or that this is your case. you really want to start driving the judge towards adopting particular positions on that points. So one of the things that I'll often do is ask myself when I'm writing my introduction, what is the most important point I'm going to talk about, and how do I impress that on the judge? Say it's like a particular stakeholder. So I'll be like, it follows that the first thing I discuss in the speech will be stakeholder X. And note, adjudicator, we think that the person who is able to deliver for this stakeholder is likely going to be the one who wins the debate for X, Y, and Z reasons. So you already start integrating basically adjudication style framing for the judge in the way that you deliver your own split. And someone who was incredibly good at this was James Stratton. I love listening to some of his speeches because he'll spend a little bit longer than you traditionally do on an introduction, maybe an extra 20 seconds, but it'll be very clear about within his split what points he thinks is important, why he wants to drive the speech in one way or the other. And it's really quite interesting to listen to, and it's quite efficient, and starts being able to shape the debate in a particular direction. And I'll do that same story split that incorporates some of the framework questions, some of the impacting and weighing importance questions, why should the judge care about this, straight in my introduction as a second speech. I think this should be contrasted a little bit with a third speech. In terms of third speeches, I think what is really required from a third speech is thoroughness. It's about closing off heaps of issues, and it's less necessarily about telling stories, because the stories will probably have been established quite early on in terms of the introduction. It's unlikely you'll be able to tell one particular story that hasn't been heard, that is able to dominate the debate at third. So if you want a model for how you should set up your introductions as a third speaker, I would point to the introductions that Ben Jackson gives. If you look at I thought the semifinal was better than the final. So if you look at the Cinnamon Scroll final that he was in, not that the final was a bad introduction, I just thought it broke down less clearly. The way in which he set up his introduction was essentially just to go through the framework of the debate and explained, these are what the teams have brought. This is how you should judge them. This is why we think we win. And having an introduction that isn't necessarily just shouting or bringing a particular framework, but rather just being like, this is the debate that we had, and this is the pathway to giving the debate to my team, is a really useful thing to do at third, because it does some of the work that happens at second in a more formalized way, which crystallizes a little bit for the judge, makes them more able to engage with that as something that's practical for them to use to start inputting into their own adjudication, and it forces you to think about what is particularly important or why you think you should win the debate. And I often think that it's the preparatory stage of this, the forcing you to think about these particular points or deal with these points, that is most useful to you, because it means that if you're thinking about, I can't really explain why this point matters, it means that you'll have to do a lot of work actually in the point to reestablish that strong impetus for the judge to credit it strongly, or why it should shift the debate. So put a lot of effort into actually thinking about how you want to set up those points from your introduction, because thinking about how they play out in the introduction should reflect and probably impact how you then set up your case. Okay, we have a couple of questions from individuals who are watching the stream, and if anyone else has questions, please let them go. So the question is, how does one join a club while at school? Is it a good point to make a thing? I don't understand the second question, so if you want to rephrase it, about how to join a club while at school, well, hopefully your school has a debating club. So reach out, and remember, there will be, if you live in an area with a different population or a university, often you will have schools debating for a particular thing. So reach out to your teachers, look up the universities in your area, maybe get in touch with them, and hopefully they can point you to the relevant schools organization to help you. Equally, some clubs allow school children to come along to clubs events. Obviously not the ones that are more catered to university students, but potentially just like your general practice and your general thing. So you can ingratiate yourself like that. But equally, there's a lot of now online tournaments to help younger people get involved with debating. So have a look around. I know I think a Malaysian university is running an Asian schools debating competition that's particularly targeted at high school students. So have a look at that. Join the New Zealand debating Facebook page, join the Australian and Asian debating Facebook pages, and that's very useful to get through. Okay, rephrasing of the question. The second question is, what is the victory condition for a very fine debate? So there's two ways you can interpret that question, particularly the word fine. One is to say it's concerning a very narrow debate, and one is just it's a very good debate in that it's difficult to distinguish between the teams because you think it's just been an excellent debate, and which will often be very similar because narrow debates often lead to very closely matched outcomes where it's difficult for one team to push over the other. So in terms of setting up your victory conditions, the steps that I tend to go through predominantly arise from that first bit of prep I did. So I asked myself what the comparative is, and then very closely compared the two things, established where I'm the same, where I'm different, what are our overlapping benefits, what can be claimed as unique in the debate from each particular side, and that'll allow you to shape the debate in a particular way that excludes material or includes material that may be useful to you. And then the second thing is looking at the framework. So really asking yourself, what are the most important stakeholders in the debate? Why do I care about them? Why do I think they're vulnerable? Secondly, what does this group care about? Why? Because remember, we want to help people actualize their preferences. We don't necessarily just want to impose our preferences on everyone. So you have to think about from the perspective of this group, how am I able to help them? And then you do the two little steps at the end in terms of relevance, which are weighting and impacting. Well, impacting than weighting. And impacting is you explain how big the effect is, and then weighing is how it fits into the rest of the debate, why it's more important or less important to other things. So just to run that all together and make it quite clear, if I was giving an introduction as a third speech and I want to make it clear the victory conditions or why we win the debate, I'll set up the comparative and I'll be like, these points, for, the debate that is being had is about X against X. That necessarily means that some parts of the case the affirming team wanted to bring, such as X and X, fall out of the debate because they're non-mutually exclusive or yada, yada, yada. It follows that then the way that you judge this debate is who is able to deliver for X, Y, and Z group. And so then and it might be multiple groups and it might be quite complex, or you can be like, there's two major battlegrounds within this debate that are both important and we think we're able to win both. Then you explain how you win both. What is the preference of these groups? Why do they care about these particular things? And then you explain how you actually get to those outcomes. So the reason why we best cater to these preferences that we've proven that the LGBT community holds more than others is because we brought you this mechanism that we think has this impact. And it follows that I'll discuss the two things, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. And then you dive straight into those particular issues. So that's how you run together a victory conditions in a very sharp, condensed way. Neat. I'm gonna have a little bit of a breather. Does anyone have any more questions? Just flick them through before we just discuss some like unique types of introductions or ways that you can, or practical steps that you can use to improve your introductions. Thank you. Goodbye. Drive-by questioning. Okay, so for the rest of the session, what I thought we could do is discuss various popular techniques for giving introductions and ways in which you can make them the most effective that you can. And then we'll talk about some practical tips of ways you can practice introductions and make them better. So in terms of popular techniques used for introductions, there are a huge range. Some people will tell you that, oh, debates are always about what is the problem. So make sure your introduction covers the problem that we try and solve is this. And some people are like, no, you have to explain why your debate has real consequences. So always focus on those impacts. We need to fix X thing by doing X thing, which has this consequence. Or some people will be quite principled. They'll be like, you need to establish the principal parameters of this debate. Which in some ways is talking about like the framework that should be used to judge it, but some people take very literally by saying we need a principal point. How do we put a principal point in this debate that we can ground the debate with? And then sometimes it's relational to within your position within the debate, in that a lot of coaches give advice to pick up on some particular thing that the opposition said and really hammer it for a bit. Some coaches advise against that. I would probably lean more to the latter than the former in terms of how you set up those introductions. So let's just go through those ideas and explain where they can be useful and what is the best way to do it. So in terms of the first set of ideas I was talking about, where judges want you to talk about the problem, or they want to talk to you about the context, or they want to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. The reason why I would advise just doing one of these things during your introductions, if you're like a first or second speaker, is that unless it's something that the opposition has particularly missed and you want to highlight it as something that you think helps you win the debate, which is often quite useful if you think they've missed one big contextual thing, it's good to start with that, is that it can be a little bit limited and it can become disjointed from the rest of your case. So I would really advise you to try and get a little bit more of a rounded, holistic view within your introduction to make sure you're covering things. And once again, the best way to do that is to tell a particular story of how something is going to happen, walk through why you think it's likely we'll walk through how exactly you think it plays, and then draw attention to the particular points that are important. So say, for example, what's really been missed within this debate is the context. And if you take into account this bit of context, the way in which we think this plays out is, and then you tell the story. We are really attracted to narrative as a style. It makes our points seem more convincing, more compelling, but it also makes sure you're linking all the things in from the very first moments of your context all the way to the end consequence of the particular point you want to prove, that you can then link into the debate when you go into your split and explain why you value things over different things, or you go into like a framework style point as to why I should prioritize X, Y, and Z over X, Y, Z in the debate. So when judges give you a very prescriptive, or coaches give you a very prescriptive way to do introductions, ask yourself if that can be integrated into a broader story. But the definitely take away from that is that judges and adjudicators and coaches are recognizing particular things they think was missing from your speech, and that if you tell a story, you can highlight those particular things a lot better, because it's way easier to give me that scope of the story and then say where we particularly differs on the context, or how the mechanism operates, or the application, or what we think that the impacts are, which are all things that, if you go back to the episode we did on responsiveness, are ways to break down the opposition's stranglehold on the debate. And then what you do with that is take that broader story and highlight particular parts of it. So often the best advice that I think I can give you is try and tell a general story from start to end, and then highlight the particular weaknesses you think that story demonstrates in the opposition's case. The second type of things are way more debate-specific ones, and sometimes they're discussed as ethos attacks, where what you really want to do is establish momentum in the debate by dunking aggressively on a point that another speaker has given, try to beat it. If you are way better than a team, you don't need to do this. You'll look like a dick, so be very sensitive to context. Where it can be useful is if there's a highly overconfident speaker that you think is swaying the judge just on like the collective, like the cloud of bullshit they've created is being held together just by their confidence and charm. And when I think, the way I like to think about ethos attacks is think about like pulling a particular string and why you think everything will crumble away from it. And it can be a really nice experience for a judge, for a team to say, or for a speaker to say, if you take the totality of the case, it seems quite clear. They've told you this, they've told you this, they've told you this. But what they've particularly missed, and what is really important, is this. And then you really explain why it's good, and then they're like, okay, yes, no, I think you've won that particular issue. And then use your introduction to explain how that impacts the rest of the debate. So explain how that particular assumption that they've made directs actors in particular ways, operates with particular incentives, means that the cascading effect that often happens in debates will shift one way or the other. Use your ethos attacks and your particular focus on small issues within the debate, only if it's able to build you a broader cascading effect, or to explain how it lets you win other stuff, or to some degree it makes the opposition team seem uncompelling, seem dishonest, so it's using that that framework of hello mosquitoes, using that approach to debating, in that debating is about credibility, debating is about the trust that adjudicators have on you. So using your attack to undermine the opposition's reasonableness, but also to establish reasonableness in yourself. There's nothing better than picking a particular extreme part of an opposition's case that a lot of their material rests on, like an extreme interpretation of how people react to racism, and then giving a really reasonable comparison that the judge can use, and then explaining how that has a big cascading effect in the debate that topples a lot of the points that the opposition wants to bring. That's a really particularly effective use of an introduction. So that's all of the broader theoretical discussion that I had about introductions. They change a little bit depending on which speaker is giving them. What you want to highlight will change depending on the context specific, but make sure you're doing both the narrative work, I have the judge's attention for the first 10 seconds to give them a really strong overview of either the story that I want to tell or the issues that I think are important and how they've played out within the debate, the victory to conditions as the question we wanted, and then the administrative side, going clearly through your split, making sure that you give full sentences for your issues, so you explain what you want the judge to take away with it, not just that a general issue exists within the debate. And then especially if you're a second speaker, using that opportunity when you're going through your split to start developing the judge's perception on how they should be weighing those points, explaining why you think one point is more important than the other, is quite a useful skill, both for within your introduction and helping the judge understand it, but also forcing yourself to think about these issues, which of course has good flow-on effects for your speech. Okay, anyone have any questions? I'll give you a minute to flick through questions, and if not, we'll go through some practical exercises, some how to put these things in work, and what I do to try and amp up my introduction to make them more effective. Cool. Should we discuss some practical applications of introduction theory? So I think there's several ways that you can improve your introductions. I may have been signed out. I don't think I've been signed out. Let me just check. Nope, the video is still going. Excellent. Yeah, practical applications. So I think introductions are actually quite important because they teach you quite useful skills that can be integrated into your points, so that they're a good like general technique for becoming a better speaker, and because they should be reflective of your prep work or your thinking work. So giving lots of introductions is a helpful way to cap off prep practices. So often what I'll do, I think I'll do two things. One is where you just want to really practice both your prepping skills, your ability to generate good arguments, clear arguments, and then talk about why the issues are important and give an overview of those issues. To when I'm doing those practice preps, so I'll have like a list of motions and I'll be prepping them by myself. If I don't have enough time to give full speeches, and by no means you need to do, just give a practice introduction. So how do you tell a particular story using the narrative if you are a first speaker, and then practicing doing those long form splits where you explain very clearly what you want the actual end consequence of the point to be. And if you are a later speaker, so say you've done a prep and you normally speak third, working on figuring out how to phrase your win conditions in a way that seems really reasonable. So trying to predict what you think the opposition team is going to bring, how to then shape shape what you want the adjudicator to take out of your introduction, to be responsive to that phantom opposition that you have constructed. And I think this is just a generally useful tool, because it's really hard to talk about why we should care about things, particularly in New Zealand. Do not teach kids or do not teach anyone enough to how to think about setting up a debate in terms of why I should care about the things that I do. And we have done lots of noise on the bench, from the bench episodes, and actually lots of these episodes on figuring out how you prioritize material and how you impress the importance of material onto adjudicators. So practicing that skill, you should credit this over this. This is the most important material because the way in which we know that this group's preferences is this, figuring out how to tell that story and include that like meta-analysis of the debate is a very useful skill, and doing more of it will just make you better at it. So very, very useful in terms of being the end consequence or the materialization of practice prep sessions. The other thing that I think is quite useful to do is give introductions after you give speeches. And often what this will be designed to do is it'll help link you into the best version of your case. And hopefully you'll learn often from like, oh, wow, we really missed this particular point. It's one of the reasons why I think leaders' replies are quite helpful for first speakers in the scope of their career, because the more leaders' replies they give, the more they're like, oh, this is how I should have set up my first speech when we went into it. So giving that introduction afterwards makes it quite clear what you missed, how you can give a more rounded, more preemptive, not just preemptive, more robust introduction and speech in your first speaker if you speak earlier. But also in particular, I think it helps you develop skills of efficiency. There is not enough focus on New Zealand debating on being efficient. And the difference between an efficient speaker and an inefficient speaker isn't the fact that one speaker speaks a lot faster or has more points. It's that they're able to have pauses within their speech for the judge to appreciate things and allow them to bring it in. And it allows them to get to the heart of their points rather than circling around their points, which can confuse the judge and make it unclear what exactly you want to take away from it. So sometimes I'll give several practice introductions in a row, and I'll make them shorter each time to see how much I can stretch that efficiency. So if I gave a speech within a particular debate, and so I know the case, I'm not particularly worried about the case, and I'll figure out whether I was speaking first, second, or third within that particular speech. I'll give my first practice introduction, where I'll read my introduction. I'll try and get it under 1 minute 30 to explain a particular story or to set up the split in a way that makes it very clear. And remember, often I do second practices, so it's that second bit of trying to use the administrative portion of your speech in terms of your split to actually convey important ideas to the adjudicator about how they should be judging the debate. What do we weigh as a particular team? And then the second time I'll do it 1 minute. And then the third time I'll do it in 45 seconds. And I think 45 seconds is really the sweet spot. That's how much time you want to devote to an introduction. Because if you start going longer than 45 seconds, it really like the stuff you're putting in introduction really could just be in points that you make. It's no longer particularly useful for you to put that material in your introduction. It's lost that impetus of being straight in the first few seconds of your speech, straight off of the silence that comes prior to it. And it just means that your speech is likely to be less efficient. You haven't really dived down to the heart of your idea and expressed it in a clear way. And often when you do practices, it'll feel a little bit artificial. You won't have anyone there in front of you. You should record them and then play it back to you and then cringe at the way that you set up that point or how you were inarticulate about particular things. But it makes you consider things like efficiency, makes you focus on how you tell the particular story, how can you do it in the least words, how can you do it in the clearest, simplest way, but also forces you to start thinking about what is the heart of my case, what is the core of my speech. Often inefficiency is not about just like not knowing how to cut or how to get efficient or how to say things in few words. It's actually about it's not knowing what your case is. It's not knowing what exactly you want the judge to take away. It belies a deeper problem of the disjunct between a case being a collection of points and a case being a spear that goes to the heart of exactly what you want to prove to the judge. And so introductions are a particularly good way, especially if you do them multiple times, of zeroing in on what you think is precisely the thing that you want the judge to be taking away from this debate and the way in which you are likely to win. So I think that brings us quite neatly to the end of all of the stuff I had prepared to talk to you about. So if you have any particular questions, I'll be on for the next 5 minutes. So leave a comment and I can answer it. If not, I hope to see you at Clubs Night. Auckland Club Night is going to be tonight. And also sign up for Whippersnapper. So many New Zealanders haven't signed up for Whippersnapper yet. So if you're waiting for trials, which most Aucklanders are, that's entirely fair. But if you aren't, find some friends. Go to Whippersnapper. It'll be great. The numbers are fluctuating. So give you 5 more minutes to think of any questions. Just flick them in a comment and we can have a chat. Also, if you watch this afterwards, we still monitor the comments. We know we have a lot of people who don't watch it live, but just watch it afterwards. It's interesting seeing the number of minutes viewed just slowly tick up. If you want us to open question time a little bit earlier to collect people's questions so we can talk about them, or if you want a more engaged presence in terms of answering your questions once you leave them on the comment section, leave that as a comment as feedback, because we will interpret that feedback and we'll hopefully shift up the way we deliver these presentations. Oh, it's a beautiful night. I'll probably have to judge Auckland Club night. And I'll do it from out here, which should be nice. I'm quite hungry. The budget was announced today. Isn't that exciting? I'm really excited for Australs. It'll be fun. Joe's going to be a brilliant DCA, so that'll be nice. I think the teams will be really good. Auckland's sending a huge amount of judges, so if you're keen to judge, join the pile. Trials are going to be fun. Friendship is going to be lit. We're going to have lots of brunches because me, Joe, and Grace live quite close to uni. Hopefully, we'll host a lot of fun events here. Yeah, it's going to be lovely. Bit nervous for trials. I should have a trial episode of this thing. Then again, I'm probably not the best person to talk to. I fairly consistently do better at tournaments than I do at trials. But then again, maybe it's good for me to think out loud about why that process has not been superb in the past. It's because of teamwork. Trials don't prioritize teamwork. I love getting it. Like I really think that debating, when you do well at debating, it's because you put in the effort with another person and you develop like a strong bond with them, like a psychic link with them. And then I get really deranged, get really bothered during trials when I'm popped with different people in different positions and I find it hard to get my rhythm going. Yeah. Okay, neat. I think I will say goodbye to you now before the mosquitoes devour me. And hopefully I see you at Club Night tonight.